is to look as deeply and as broadly as we would have to do to find out. And the remit of Dame Janet Smith's review is drawn very widely in that regard, in terms of the period of time it can cover, and the range it gives her to ask the questions she needs to ask. I mean, it's an issue on which I'm determined we should have an answer. It's a question to which I'm determined we should have an answer, but I'm afraid I don't know the answer yet.
But we know enough now to know that there was a culture of unacceptable and inappropriate behaviour at the BBC. Well, it wasn't just, I mean, Jimmy Savile was at the far extreme of that, but it wasn't just Jimmy Savile. It seems perfectly clear we've had people coming out on a virtually daily basis to talk of things that perhaps then being groped on air by other people. So this is not just particularly, this is a culture at the BBC. So how satisfied are you that this was a problem of culture within the BBC?
Well, I'm convinced it must have been a problem of culture inside the BBC. I don't believe that somebody like Jimmy Savile could do what he did without there being a broader cultural problem. And that's why we were so careful to specify culture and practices in the terms of reference for Dame Janet's review. And if I could just distinguish between, and I think it's important to distinguish between criminal allegations, criminal behaviour, criminal activity of the sort that is alleged about Jimmy Savile, and sexual harassment. And it could well be that all these things are on the same, they're part of the same culture. And that's something I hope Dame Janet will give us an understanding of. But it is important to recognise the difference between direct criminal allegations and allegations of sexual harassment.
How does the BBC deal with allegations of sexual harassment?
Well, we have a number of... do you mean today? Today?
Absolutely.
Yes. We have a number of routes available to people who need to address a complaint of sexual harassment. They can speak to their line manager. They can speak to the HR department. We have a whistleblowing line available if they don't regard any of those things as possible. Of course, if they're a member of a trade union, they can go to the trade union and expect to be represented there.
And how does that differ from how the BBC dealt with these things in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s?
Well, I don't believe there was a culture of awareness as there is today, that you have to have your systems built to be ready to deal with allegations of sexual harassment. I'm not sure that in the 60s and 70s people would have known what to do with an allegation of sexual harassment. And perhaps more worryingly, I'm not sure in the 60s and 70s that they would have felt there was anything they could do. And what we strive to do today is to be really clear to our staff that there are various routes and options available to them if they need to make if they need to make a complaint about sexual harassment. And those options have been set out twice in emails. I think I might have sent twice. Once certainly, and I think it was referenced in another all-staff email since this Savile crisis began, to make sure people know where to go if they have a complaint to make.
How many sexual harassment complaints have there been at the BBC since back each year since the 1960s?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Davis, but I'm very happy to try and get the answer for you, of course.
Have we not looked into how many complaints have been about sexual harassment at the BBC? Is that not a bit of interest to you as the Director General?
It's very much of interest to me at the moment to ensure that the existing structures are in place to deal with new allegations of sexual harassment. That's what I've been focusing on. But I'm very happy, of course, to get hold of any data I can to answer your question.
But I'm just surprised that that isn't something that you've wanted to find out for yourself without me having to ask you. I would have thought that one of the first things that you would have wanted to do was to say, well, hold on a minute, we've got a problem here. This is clearly a cultural problem. Well, let's go back and let me see how many complaints we've been having at the BBC about this.
I have made inquiries about the current scale of activity and complaints, but I haven't made those historical inquiries.
So how many complaints have there been in the last couple of years then?
No, I can't give you a firm answer to that question.
So you haven't even looked at what the current situation is?
I've asked whether or not there are significant numbers, and I've been assured there are not significant numbers at the moment. But
what's a significant number? Surely one complaint of sexual harassment is too many in the BBC. So when you ask for are there a significant number? What sort of number did you have in mind?
Well, to be honest, I would be worried if there were anything in excess of 5 a year.
So up to 5 is okay?
No, up to 5 is not okay. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. No complaints, a number of sexual harassment complaints is okay.
Well, surely when you have something like this, you can see that there's been a culture at the BBC of inappropriate behaviour, sexual harassment, sexual abuse. surely the very first thing you do is want to think, well, the first thing we can do is make sure nothing like this is happening at the moment. Nobody who's currently employed by the BBC is involved in any of this inappropriate behaviour. If there is, I'm going to get these people out as a matter of urgency. Yet you don't seem to have done any of that.
No, what I haven't done is ask the statistical question. I have paid very close attention to the existing structures we have in place, and to making sure that any current complaints, any complaints that are coming through, are being properly dealt with.
So have you asked who is currently working for the BBC has had complaints of sexual harassment made against them?
We are tracking any complaints made about people currently working for the BBC at the moment. Anything that's come out of the current affair is being tracked.
But it's not a tracking matter. Has anybody made any complaint? I mean, it's a factual point. It's not a tracking matter. Have you asked if there are any current people employed by the BBC who have had complaints of sexual harassment made against them?
I have. Information is being assembled on exactly that subject. So yes.
But how long does it take to assemble that kind of information? I mean, it's fairly straightforward information.
New allegations are being made and they're coming in. That's what I meant by.
What about the ones that have already been made?
We've set up. Well, what I'm looking at is all the existing current allegations.
And what have you found when you've been looking at? I mean, how long does it take to look at them? How many are there? I mean, how many are you looking at?
We're looking at between 5 and 10 serious allegations relating to activities, but over the whole period in question, over the Savile period.
But what about people now who are employed by the BBC?
I believe they're included in the numbers I'm giving.
And how many of them are there?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Well, I can't differentiate between the total number we're looking at of historical allegations with current allegations.
Can I suggest that that's unacceptable, that you need to be getting a grip of your current organisation? You're the Director General of this organisation. You've got a duty to make sure that the people you're employing are safe to be employed by the BBC. Do you know that it was discussed in some of the programmes that there was an allegation that there was a sort of a paedophile ring at the BBC? Do you have the BBC taken any steps to identify who else was involved in that paedophile ring?
That's an allegation I've seen made in the last few days. It's something that we are putting our resources at the disposal of the police in. I mean, a paedophile ring would be a matter for a police investigation, and we're taking every step we can to ensure that we're able to support the police in investigating that.
Who in the BBC decided to bus in young, vulnerable girls from institutions to be in the audience of programmes that were being presented by Jimmy Savile?
I genuinely don't know the answer to that yet. We're trying to pull together all the documentation we can about which managers and so on were in positions of authority at the time Jimmy Savile's programmes were being made, and we're supplying that information to the police so that they know how to take their investigations forward.
Who in the BBC allowed these children to be taken backstage to Jimmy Savile's dressing room after the shows?
Mr. Davis, we're trying to answer those questions in the same way. The Dame Janet Smith's review has been set up to ask and answer all these questions, and we will give every support we can to her to enable her to do that.
But with respect, you don't need to set up a review to ask questions like that, do you? I mean, surely you're more than capable of asking that. I mean, surely you don't need somebody else to ask those questions for you.
We've set up a review for the an independent review, for the precise reason that we want the outside world to be assured that we've asked these questions properly. We set up that review within 2 weeks of the scale of this crisis becoming known. And I'm absolutely convinced that the right way to get to the bottom of this is to give all the support now to Dame Janet Smith so that she can answer the sort of question you're asking.
But have you set up the reviews to allow you to avoid answering these sorts of questions, try and farm it off to somebody else, palm it away, say it's nothing to do with me, I've set up a review. I mean, we see politicians do this all the time, you know, when in a hole set up a review and kick it into the long grass. Is that not just exactly what the BBC's do?
I don't think there's anything about what we've structured by way of the 2 independent reviews that's designed to avoid answering questions. The whole point of their independence, the way they've been set up, the support they're given, will enable them to ask absolutely any question they want, to go anywhere they want. It's the opposite of an attempt to hide things. It's the opposite of an attempt to cover things up. This is an attempt to make things wide open. The fate of these reviews is that they will be provided direct to the BBC Trust. They won't be edited in any way, except for any legal reasons as necessary, but the completed reviews will be handed to the BBC Trust alongside BBC Management's proposal to act, and then the Trust will review whether or not we've done what we should have done. But the scope and scale of these reviews is as wide as it could possibly be to get the answers to the questions you ask.
But my final question is, based on what I've just asked, and your lamentable lack of knowledge about any of the questions that I've asked, coming back to the Chairman's question, are you still going to maintain that you and the BBC have dealt with this matter as well as you should have done?
I think that the independent reviews are absolutely the right answer to getting to the bottom of the questions you're asking. There's no question in my mind about that.
I didn't ask you about that. I said, are you still maintaining, despite your lack of knowledge about any of these questions that I've asked you, including current people working at the BBC who may have had sexual harassment complaints made against them, are you still going to maintain that you personally and the BBC have dealt with this matter as well as you should have done?
I'm sorry I can't answer the detailed questions you've given me on the current state of sexual harassment. I'm confident that everything we've done by way of making sure that our systems and processes are available to people who need to complain is strong. But no, I think the key way to sort this out is to give the two reviews the chance to do their work.
Okay.
Steve Earle.
Thanks, Russell. It's clear that you don't know whether sexual abuse of children and young women was endemic within the BBC, and you don't know how many cases there are or historically have been within the organisation. But on the 12th of October, you announced an inquiry that, in your words, would examine whether the BBC child protection whistleblowing and bullying and harassment policies and practices are now fit for purpose. Is that true?
Yes, that's one of the terms of the review, yes.
Okay, so from what we now know, 21 days later from that announcement, do you think that the current policies towards child protection, whistleblowing and bullying require modification?
We introduced new child protection policies, and if I may, I'll ask my colleague David Jordan to provide some extra detail on this, but in 2002, that were of a completely different scale and order to anything that the BBC had before. And I regard those policies as fit for purpose, but I'm not settling for assuming that that's the case. I've already ordered an internal audit to check. An internal audit was already underway to check that our child protection policies were working properly, and the Trust has asked me to report to them in December, again, to check that all those policies are working as effectively as they should be.
When will that report back? Because it's important that you're able to make a judgment on whether those policies are fit for purpose.
Now, the internal audit will be completed as soon as possible, which is the first thing I will see, and then I will give my interim report to the Trust in December.
In your time at the BBC, have you ever personally investigated or been part of programme teams that have investigated child abuse and paedophile rings?
Just reflecting on my time as a journalist, I don't believe so. I don't recall any.
But you are aware of investigations into child abuse and paedophile rings, other than on Newsnight? Are there any programmes that have also failed to be broadcast?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can you recall any documentaries or current affairs investigations that exposed paedophile rings during your 23 years at the corporation?
Yes, there was. I remember a documentary series. I would struggle to say exactly when it was. I think it was probably in the 1990s that focused on.
Was that the secret life of
paedophile activity? Yes.
Okay.
There have been others as well.
Sorry?
There have been others as well. For example, there was a panorama investigation into bail hostels that centred on paedophiles that were in bail hostels at the time. That was much more recent.
But the secret life of a paedophile exposed, obviously, the secret life of so-called child protection expert Peter Wrighton. So you're aware of that story? You do recall it?
Yes.
Wrighton, it was suggested in the programme, operated a network of paedophiles, some of whom were connected to powerful people in government and to other professions. Do you think it's ironic, therefore, that the institution that produced a documentary